Look at him, wasting time washing that old car. People like him don't belong here. Samuel looked up calmly, his voice steady. You laugh today because you think you know my worth. But one day, the truth will silence your laughter. It was a calm Saturday afternoon in a quiet American suburb. The sky was clear, and the streets carried the silence of well-kept lawns and clean driveways. At the far end of Willow Creek Lane, a black man named Samuel Green, 55 years old, stood outside his modest two-story house. He wore old jeans, a plain white t-shirt, and simple sneakers. In his hand was a sponge, dripping with soapy water, and in front of him sat a dark black Ford that had seen better days. He hummed a soft tune as he scrubbed the car's hood, moving slowly, but with the patience of someone who had done this many times before. Samuel was no stranger to work. His hands were rough, his back a little bent from years of carrying burdens, both physical and emotional. Neighbors who had lived there for years knew him as the quiet man, polite, always minding his own business. He cut his own grass, fixed things around his home, and never caused trouble. Some said he was just an average man nearing retirement with little to show for it. Few ever bothered to look deeper. That afternoon, the calm was interrupted by the sound of expensive tires rolling over the street. A black convoy of cars pulled up to the house next door. First came a long Mercedes SUV, shining under the sun, followed by a Porsche, and then a Lexus. The engines purred with wealth, and soon after, a moving truck arrived. People peered through their curtains, curious about the new arrivals. The new neighbors were a wealthy Chinese family, the Liangs. Mr. Liang was a successful real estate developer, tall, confident, and dressed in a tailored suit even though it was the weekend. His wife, Mrs. Liang, wore diamond earrings that sparkled brighter than the sun. Their two children, a teenage boy and a younger girl, carried the air of privilege in the way they walked and spoke. They laughed loudly, their voices carrying across the street, as movers unloaded designer furniture, marble statues, and golden-framed paintings. The Liangs noticed Samuel washing his old car. The contrast was almost comical to them. The teenage son pointed at Samuel and laughed. Look at that man, washing his own car with a sponge. Who even does that anymore? Mrs. Liang smirked. Some people never leave the old ways behind. Mr. Liang chuckled. Well, this neighborhood is about to change. Maybe it is time for some people to move out. Their words carried across the driveway. Samuel heard them, though he kept his face calm. He dipped the sponge back into the bucket, squeezed it gently, and kept scrubbing the hood. His silence seemed to annoy them even more. Other neighbors gathered quietly, pretending to welcome the Liangs, but secretly curious to see how the wealthy family would fit in. When Mrs. Johnson, a woman from across the street, approached to greet them, Mrs. Lang asked in a loud voice, "How do you live next to someone like that for so long? Look at his car, look at his house. This is not the kind of image a luxury neighborhood should have." Mrs. Johnson glanced nervously at Samuel, who simply nodded politely and continued his work. The teenage boy laughed again, louder this time. Maybe he should start a car wash business. At least then it would make sense. The laughter echoed, sharp like knives. Some neighbors shifted uncomfortably, but no one spoke up. Samuel rinsed the soap from the hood, water streaming down onto the driveway. His face showed no anger, no sadness, just calm. He picked up a towel and began drying the car slowly, as if the laughter didn't matter. Inside, though, he felt the sting. Not because of the insults, but because of how quickly people judge others by what they see on the surface. He had lived long enough to know that truth often stays hidden, waiting for the right time to reveal itself. When the movers finished, the Liangs stood proudly in front of their mansion-like home. Gold-trimmed gates closed behind them. Their luxury cars gleamed under the sun. The whole street looked at them in awe, whispering about how rich and powerful they must be. Meanwhile, Samuel put away his sponge, emptied the bucket, and sat quietly on his porch. The sun dipped lower in the sky, and for a moment, everything seemed still again. But the silence was heavy now, carrying the weight of unspoken words and unseen truths. The next morning, the neighborhood was buzzing with whispers. Everyone wanted to talk about the new family. Some praised their wealth and elegance. Others quietly admitted the Liangs seemed arrogant. But in every conversation, one thing kept coming up: the sharp comments they had made about Samuel. Mrs. Johnson visited her friend Mrs. Parker across the street. With coffee mugs in hand, they looked out the window toward Samuel's house. "I felt bad yesterday," Mrs. Johnson said. "They were laughing at him right in front of everyone." Mrs. Parker sighed. "Yes, but you know how people are. They only see what's in front of them. Samuel never shows much about himself. Drives that old car, lives simply. Maybe the Liangs just think he is not their kind." Down the street, a few teenagers were already repeating the joke. "Hey, maybe Mr. Green will wash our cars too," one boy shouted as Samuel walked past. Their laughter was harsh, but Samuel only nodded and kept walking. Inside, Samuel's house was quiet and humble. The furniture was old but clean. The walls carried family photos. Pictures of his late wife, who had passed away 10 years ago. Pictures of his son and daughter, both grown and living in different states now. Samuel sat by the window, sipping tea. His eyes wandered to the Liang's home, where delivery trucks kept arriving with new luxuries. He thought of the world outside, how quickly it judged. He thought of the years he had worked in silence, building something no one around him could imagine. He smiled faintly. "Let them think what they want," he told himself. "Truth needs no announcement." Later that day, Samuel went to the local store for groceries. At the counter, he overheard two men talking. "You see the new folks?" One asked. "Yes, loaded with money. They said this neighborhood will finally rise in value now. And that black man next door, Green or whatever his name is, he does not belong here." Samuel placed his items on the counter without a word. The cashier smiled kindly at him, but the words of the men echoed. Society was quick to decide who belonged and who did not. That evening, as the sun set, the Liangs threw a small gathering at their new home. Luxury cars filled the driveway. Music played softly from speakers hidden in the garden. Neighbors came dressed nicely, excited to be part of something that looked glamorous. Samuel stayed on his porch, reading a book. From where he sat, he could hear laughter, smell the expensive food, and see glimpses of shining lights. At one point, Mr. Liang's voice carried across the yard. "We should start a community committee. We need to set standards for this neighborhood. Houses, cars, everything should reflect success. Otherwise, it lowers the image." Some people nodded. Others stayed quiet. But Samuel knew where this was going. He had seen it before. When people build walls of wealth, they forget the value of respect. 2 weeks later, tension rose. The Liangs had officially called for a neighborhood meeting in their wide living room. Nearly every household sent a representative. Crystal glasses were filled with sparkling drinks. Platters of fine food were served. But the purpose was not just hospitality. Mr. Liang stood at the center, his voice smooth and commanding. "This community deserves better. We want to raise the standard. To do this, everyone must maintain their property, cars, and appearance. We cannot allow one house to bring down the value of all." Eyes shifted to Samuel, who sat quietly near the back. He wore the same simple clothes, his calm expression unchanged. Mrs. Liang added sharply, "Some people here still live as if it is the past century. Old cars in the driveway, outdated houses. It is not acceptable. Whispers spread across the room. Some agreed. Others looked uncomfortable. Samuel listened, then raised his hand slightly. His voice was steady when he spoke. This is a community, not a contest. A man's car or house does not define his worth. Respect does. Mr. Lang smiled coldly. Respect is earned. And in this world, it comes from success. Tell me, what success have you shown? Look around you. Do you see anyone inspired by your old car? The room grew tense. Some people lowered their heads. A few nodded silently at Liang's words. Samuel stood slowly. I have lived here for many years, he said. I have kept peace with everyone. I never disturbed anyone's life. If my car makes me less valuable in your eyes, then perhaps the problem is not with me. The silence was heavy. Finally, Mr. Liang waved his hand. We will vote on forming a committee. Standards must be set. That night, as people left, whispers followed Samuel. Some were sympathetic, others judgmental. But one thing was clear. The Liangs had begun turning the community against him. At home, Samuel sat on his porch again. He looked up at the stars, his face thoughtful. He remembered his younger days, the struggles. The years of building a business from nothing. The nights without sleep, the sacrifices. He remembered the turning point when his ideas had finally succeeded. When his investments had grown. When his company had spread quietly across industries. But he had chosen not to live like a billionaire. He had chosen peace, simplicity, and privacy. He wondered if maybe that choice now carried a price. Days turned into weeks, and the Liangs kept pushing. They spoke to neighbors about raising home values, starting projects and keeping the street exclusive. They never mentioned Samuel by name, but everyone understood their target. One afternoon, Samuel returned from the store to find a note on his door. It read, "Please consider selling your house. The neighborhood needs progress." No signature, but the message was clear. At the community park, whispers followed him. Parents called their children closer. Teenagers made jokes. "Here comes the car washer," they laughed. Samuel remained calm, greeting those who greeted him, ignoring the rest. But inside, the pressure was real. He had lived through racism, rejection, and struggle before. Yet each time it happened, it carried the same sting. He wondered how much more the Liangs would push. One Saturday morning, as he washed his car again, the teenage Liang boy stood at the driveway, recording a video on his phone. "Look at this, guys," he said loudly. "In a street full of luxury cars, this man washes his old junk like it is treasure. Maybe we should start a fundraiser to buy him something better." The boy laughed, and within hours, the video was shared online among local teens. The mockery spread wider. Samuel's name became a joke on social media. That evening, Mrs. Johnson visited Samuel. She looked worried. "I am sorry for what they are doing to you," she said softly. "Some of us don't agree with them. We know you are a good man." Samuel thanked her with a calm smile. "Do not worry about me," he said. "Truth has a way of coming out, even if it takes time." But as the night fell, Samuel sat alone and thought. His life had always been private. He had never cared for fame or attention. But now, maybe silence was giving power to the wrong voices. The turning point came on a hot afternoon. The Liangs organized a summer block party. Tents were set up, music played, food was served, and the whole street attended. Cars lined the road, shining under the sun. Samuel sat quietly on his porch, reading again. He had no intention of attending. But when laughter grew louder, he glanced up. The teenage boy had pulled out a microphone, standing near the crowd. "Hey everyone," the boy shouted. "Let us play a game. Guess the value of Mr. Green's car." People laughed awkwardly. Some shook their heads, but no one stopped him. "Is it $500? Or maybe 300?" The boy joked. "Come on, take a guess." The crowd chuckled. Mr. Liang smiled faintly, not stopping his son. Samuel stood slowly and walked across the street. The laughter faded as he approached. His steps were steady, his face calm. He stopped in front of the boy and the microphone. "I will tell you the value," Samuel said in a strong voice. "This car has taken me through years of life. It carried me to work when I was building my company. It carried me to hospitals when my wife was sick. It carried my children to school. To you, it looks worthless. To me, it is priceless." The crowd grew quiet. Samuel looked around at the neighbors, his eyes steady. "You measure value by money. I measure it by meaning. But since you like numbers so much, perhaps one day I will show you numbers that will silence your laughter." With that, he turned and walked back to his porch. The silence that followed was heavier than all the laughter before. That night, Samuel opened an old locked drawer in his study. Inside were files, bank documents, and records. Quietly, he pulled out a folder labeled Charity Projects. He looked at it for a long moment. Maybe it was time to remind the world who he truly was. The following week, Samuel quietly made a few calls. No one in the neighborhood knew, but he still owned an office downtown. It was not a flashy skyscraper with his name on it, but a discreet building that handled his investments. Samuel Green was the founder of GreenTech, a company that had quietly grown into a billion-dollar empire in renewable energy, real estate, and healthcare technology. Most people had no idea because Samuel never attached his face to his fortune. He believed in building silently. For years, he had poured profits into scholarships for underprivileged children, medical funds for struggling families, and community development projects. On Monday morning, a convoy of black cars arrived at his home. Not flashy, but professional. Out stepped men and women in suits carrying documents. Neighbors peeked from windows, confused. Some whispered that Samuel must be in legal trouble. Others wondered if he was selling his house. By the afternoon, the truth began to leak. A journalist who had been following Samuel's quiet philanthropy had heard about the neighborhood tensions. She contacted Samuel and asked for permission to write his story. At first, he hesitated. But then he agreed, on one condition: the story should focus not on his wealth, but on the message of respect and humility. That Friday, the headline appeared in a major city newspaper. "Local man mocked by neighbors turns out to be billionaire philanthropist." The article described his rise from poverty, his years of struggle, and his decision to live simply despite enormous wealth. It highlighted the scholarships he had funded, the hospitals he had helped build, and the charities he supported. The neighborhood was stunned. Phones buzzed. Copies of the article spread quickly. People who once laughed at him now spoke his name in whispers of awe. The Leons read the article. At their golden dining table, Mrs. Liang's face turned pale. Mr. Liang's jaw tightened. The teenage boy avoided eye contact. For the first time, the arrogance in their home fell silent. The next day, Samuel sat on his porch as usual, sipping tea. The air was different. Neighbors who once ignored him now waved nervously. Mrs. Johnson came by with a warm smile. "I always knew you were special," she said. "I'm sorry I didn't stand up for you earlier." Others followed. Some brought gifts. Some brought apologies. People who had laughed at him now tried to shake his hand. Samuel accepted their kindness, but his calm smile never changed. By the afternoon, the Liangs appeared. Mr. Liang wore his best suit. His wife, a pearl necklace, their son dressed neatly. They walked across the driveway as if carrying the weight of shame. Mr. Liang spoke first. "Mr. Green, we owe you an apology. We misjudged you. We were wrong." Samuel looked at him, his voice steady. You judged me because of a car and a house, not because of who I am. What if I truly had nothing? Would you still respect me today? The question cut deep. Mrs. Liang lowered her eyes. The teenage boy shuffled his feet. Samuel continued. Wealth is not what makes a man worthy of respect. Character does. You must learn this, not only for your neighbors, but for yourselves. The Liangs nodded quietly. Their apology was sincere. But the lesson Samuel gave them was heavier than any article. Instead of moving away or building walls around his fortune, Samuel chose to use the situation as a chance to teach. He called a neighborhood meeting, this time in his own backyard. People arrived nervously, unsure what to expect. When everyone had gathered, Samuel stood at a small wooden podium. He wore the same simple clothes as always. I asked you all here, he said, because what happened these past weeks is bigger than me. It is about how we see one another. Too often, we measure value with cars, houses, and money. But real value is measured by kindness, by respect, and by what we give back to the world. He paused, letting his words sink in. You all saw me as a poor man. You judged me. Some laughed at me. But let me ask you, what if your children had been given the scholarships I funded? What if your families had been saved by the hospitals I supported? Would I still have been a man worth laughing at? The crowd shifted uncomfortably. Some nodded. Some wiped their eyes. Then Samuel announced something unexpected. He was funding a new community center right there in Willow Creek Lane, a place for children to learn, families to gather, and neighbors to support one another. The project would begin within months. Cheers broke out. Tears flowed. Suddenly, Samuel was not just the quiet man with the old car. He was the man who lifted the entire community. Over the next year, the community center rose from the ground. It was built with modern design but carried Samuel's touch of simplicity. Classrooms for children, a library, a gym, and a small clinic, all funded by Samuel. The neighborhood changed. People became closer. Children who once mocked Samuel now greeted him with respect. Parents volunteered at the center, and slowly, even the Liangs began to change. The teenage boy who had once recorded videos of mockery now spent afternoons tutoring younger kids at the center. Mr. Liang donated resources. From his real estate business to improve the playground, Mrs. Liang organized charity drives. Samuel watched all this with quiet satisfaction. He had not exposed his wealth to humiliate anyone. He had revealed it to heal a community poisoned by arrogance. One afternoon, Samuel stood at the entrance of the new center. The sun set behind him, casting a golden glow. Children ran past him, laughing. Neighbors greeted him warmly. The street that once carried whispers of mockery now carried songs of unity. Years later, Samuel grew older, but his presence remained strong. The community center bore his name, not as a monument of wealth, but as a reminder of humility and strength. On his porch, Samuel often sat in the evenings, the same old car parked beside him. He never replaced it. It had become a symbol, a story the whole neighborhood now respected. The Liangs, once arrogant, had become close friends. They often joined Samuel for tea. Their children grew up different from how they started: humble, grateful, respectful. One day, a young girl from the neighborhood approached Samuel. She held a scholarship letter in her hand. With tears in her eyes, she said, "Thank you. Mr. Green, because of you, I can go to college." Samuel smiled softly. Use what you learn to give back. That is how the circle continues. Never judge a person by what you see on the surface. True wealth is not in money, but in character, respect, and the good we give to others. Your turn. What's the life lesson you're walking away with? Tell us in the comments.